Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It is Friday, and so I am here for a quick solo KSA. I say quick, there are quite a lot of questions, so it may or may not be what you'd call quick, but it's just me, and I'm just going to get right into questions here in a second. There won't be a KSA next week. I'll be gone, and I think we'll probably let the next episode stand on its own merits because it should be a big fun one. So hopefully you'll be joining us Monday to check out the next evolution of this story as it winds towards its conclusion. We have a lot of questions today, and a lot of them are specifically about lore for the Age of Cul'sir and events that happened in our most recent episode. So obviously spoilers for that. I'm going to say right here at the outset, I will not answer all of these questions thoroughly. My reason for that is I dove into the Age of Cul'sir as far as I needed to for the story we were going to tell in that setting. I'm really glad that so many people found this sort of post-apocalyptic version of Eberron exciting and fascinating and engaging. And I just don't want to put too many things in concrete because, as I've mentioned before, this is the kind of thing that I might want to use for one-shots in the future, or you might want to use for one-shots as far as I know. I'm not aware of a big fan fiction community for our show, but if people want to explore it that way, I don't want to put guardrails around my own or anyone else's creativity regarding this setting. So some of my answers may not be fully satisfying to some of these questions. So just that quick caveat on our way in. But with that said, let's dive right in. A lot of these are from Emily, who has some very significant lore questions for us. So starting off, what was going on with Ezri? Other than Ari contacting Erandis, was there any way the Strike Force could have found out that Ezri had been resurrected a third time? Has he been resurrected? Yes, there were other ways to find out. Actually, Ezri was a possible encounter in the Dreadhold. I had a table, and one of the results on that table was that a prominent NPC appeared, and Ezri was one of the possible prominent NPCs. But that's not what we rolled. He was a possibility to be the person who came out and intercepted them when they were about to try and escape. He was a possibility for a complication as they were trying to make their way around the command center and around the courtyard. So there was the possibility to encounter Ezri there. That's not, but I let the dice rule and the players' decisions rule that, and so that's not the direction that we ended up going. That would have been very interesting. It would have been interesting to see whether it would have been a combat encounter or whether it would become a social challenge, and how the Dragon Blades would have checked that out. It was also possible for them to attempt some things by way of Vol instead of focusing all of their energy on Cul'sir specifically. And so, yeah, other decisions would have had to have been made, and in a few places other dice rolls would have had to occur. But yeah, there was totally opportunities for discovering that Ezri was alive in other ways. It happened a lot sooner than I thought it would because I hadn't factored in Ari trying to immediately contact Erandis. Did Arlo die sometime within the past 20 years, or was there another reason why he was not on the science team, even if only as an understudy? Arlo's more of a philosopher than a scientist, or at least his studies are much more theoretical. It's not to say he wouldn't be useful being a planar cosmologist, but I honestly can't remember if it was said out loud. There was a whole lot of lore said out loud, but my intention was Arlo is in the leftover bit of Galifar in the north with many of the students who aren't still active. I intended Mo to be up there with him. So Arlo is in my intention kind of is the civilian safe haven, not an active agent, so to speak. What happened to Lucan, or is this going too far into the territory of what's happening to Lucan in 998, 999 YK, and therefore you can't answer it? It's more that I can't answer it because I don't know. I didn't really put thought into what became of Lucan in the age of Cul'sir. I know where Lucan was when they left, but I didn't really explore what might have become of him in the age of Cul'sir. I imagine he's in custody on Dare in some sort of very secure facility operated by the Royal Eyes in 999. But his whereabouts in the age of Cul'sir didn't really come into my exploration. Why did you have Cadric and Ilya go back in time instead of Donabella and Bajak? I was thinking about the ways in which Dane would divide the group up. Cadric and Ilya are obviously, well, Donabella and Bajak are obviously very, very capable combatants, and Bajak is obviously very self-sustained. Donabella is pretty unpredictable, and Cadric is reliable, and Ilya is as well. And so I was trying to think how he would divide his group up, and it just made the most sense that Donabella and Ilya, or that Cadric and Ilya, would be assigned the essential task. And you got to remember that Dane's not pairing people off with the expectation that they're going to die. Like, he's staying to fight and knows. And, you know, in the end, Cardain and Merrick's and, you know, others make that choice to stay and fight. But his expectation is that he's getting the dragon. He's getting his younger agents. He's getting Cadric and Ilya and Donabella and Bajak out. He sends them because he doesn't want them staying with him, and he sends them with the strike force because that's the essential job, and he knows Cadric and Ilya will be able to see it through and are predictable and reliable enough to see it through. Donabella is, as I said, highly unpredictable, and so sending her with the kids with Bajak made more sense to me. So that's why. What happened to Finkel, Harish, Jonas, Natalia, and Jalert? I can only answer one of these. I'll be honest, I have, ever since the strike force, never again engaged with Natalia. I have not really put much thought into what's become of her. Finkel, Harish, and Jonas, I also don't know what became of them in the age of Cul'sir. I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts as to where you would place them in the age of Cul'sir. I know about Jalert. It didn't get to come up, and I wish I had managed to bring it up. Eric had the idea that that Kara would have saved Jalert from Stormreach and taken him with her, and that he had a whole kind of thing with how her powers might have developed, and what that might mean for her ability to draw on Jalert's knowledge and lore in service of the resistance out in the Dominion of the Reborn Queen. So that was the intention, and I wish I'd found a way to engage with that in the episode where Kara appeared, but I was a little bit tight on time for that night, and I knew I needed to get all 3 episodes in, so I was kind of doing no frills, like no sidetracking. But yes, that's what became with Jetlair. He's with Kara. The rest of them, I don't know. I would again be very interested to hear what you where you think you would put them if you were going to DM in the Age of Cul'sir. Darren asks, if you, Philip, could go back in time and communicate with Philip then before running the Age of Cul'sir arc, what would you tell him to do differently? Um, I so we were on a time crunch, so I'm not sure it would be possible. But if no time crunch had existed, I'd have loved to have been able to spend more time engaging with where the kids have gone, the little cameo by Nasaria and the revelation of the identity of Red would have been fun things to get the Strike Force to be able to engage with instead of squeezing it into the Dragon Blades episode just as a little Easter egg there. I'd have liked to be able to give more time there. I'm not sure how I would do that, but if I could go back and like make a wish list of things that I wish I could have done in more depth, that would be a big one. So that would be the big thing. There were a few places where I wanted to express important lore in dialogue, and I wish I'd written it out instead of winging it, because occasionally some things got missed in that. And for this last episode, when you're trying to play two different characters, don't try to indicate it by moving your head back and forth, because that moves you out of the mic. And so my volume was a lot less consistent in the most recent episode, because anytime I was doing dialogue, I had a tendency to be turning myself back and forth like I was talking to myself. So some microphone discipline or setting my mic up differently or something like that would just be a technical thing that might have been wise and might have helped a little bit. Maybe you didn't notice it. I noticed it, and if you didn't, that's great. But I noticed it. No, other than that, I'm really very happy with the way that this arc ran. One thing I wish I had done a cut to, like a little flash sideways thing, like I did in with the Order of the Emerald Claw. I wish I'd done that with the diversion when they went to get the time machine from the ship and were fighting with Demise. I wish I'd done that with the diversion to create a little bit of tension of, let's roll dice to find out who survives, how well the diversion goes, put stakes to it. There were a lot of things going on in that episode with the combat, so maybe that would have been a bad idea, but it would have been neat to provide a little bit of dramatic irony and tension there. Emily asks, who sent the Bat Dragons, Arandis or Cul'sir? Cul'sir? Whom are Arganessen more concerned about, Arandis or Cul'sir? This is a really, really great question, and it would be a very fun thing to explore in more fiction or more narrative or more gameplay. And maybe I will one day. But here's my read on how I think the dragons would be thinking. But of course, being a human, I cannot necessarily tell you how the dragons think, because dragons think so differently. The dragons were very, very afraid of the consequences of an apex dragon mark on a half dragon. We don't know why. The dragons were also very concerned with the extreme levels of magic that Cul'sir's dominion was reaching. Things that matched or even bypassed modern Khorvaire. But we don't exactly know why. So they'd have reasons to be very concerned about both. They might have a more immediate reason to be concerned about Arandis, because by coming back to life, she is immediately what they feared she would become, whereas Cul'sir might require time to become what they feared. So Arenas might be ahead. On the other hand, Cul'sir is rising to that degree, and so it might be wise to nip that in the bud, if you know what I mean. That said, the thing we do know about the dragons of Arganessen is they are extremely cautious. They don't act quickly. They're very deliberative. I just said three different things that all mean the same thing. So what I think they'd be likely to do is watch what the Reborn Queen and the Cul'sir Dominion are doing. I think they'd be likely to use agents to try and stoke conflict between the two of them. And perhaps to stoke resistance movements or another elven rebellion among the drow, working asymmetrically against them. Because remember, the dragons are very afraid of direct action. The dragons worry that direct action loosens the bonds of the daughter of Khyber and endangers the world. And so I think they'd work as asymmetrically as possible by, as I said, stoking conflict both internally and between those two sides. And if the two sides eventually erupted into direct conflict with one another, the ideal situation, I think, for the dragons would be to watch that conflict play out. And as soon as it's over, because of how destructive it would be to both sides, as soon as it's over or nearly over, move in and strike whoever is left hard and fast, because they'll be weakened enough to be more vulnerable to an attack by the dragons. So that's what I think they would be inclined to do. That leaves a lot of room for interesting storytelling. What do the dragons do in that asymmetrical warfare? How do the dragons' agents operate? Because obviously it's not mostly going to be dragons going around. It would be agents of the dragons. So there's a lot of interesting storytelling possibility there about these sort of asymmetrical operations that the dragons are putting on to weaken those forces as much as they can. Darren says, would you recommend as a general DM advice to do a quick time travel arc in order to undo a TPK? Not as general advice. I feel like it would be a very specific thing. Had I not introduced a Sphinx, I don't think I would ever have thought to do time travel in this game. And the big time travel arc mostly occurred because of how ready the party seemed to use time travel to try and solve problems. And so creating this as sort of consequence of that was interesting to me. So no, not as general advice. It would depend very much on the specifics of it. I almost want to say I would use it for a TPK that didn't mean something, but then that makes the time travel of it feel less cool and less epic because the stakes feel lower because we got killed in some sort of stupid, piddly way. So I don't know. I guess the questions I would ask back are, is it going to enhance the story you're telling? What are your players interested in doing? I presume myself to be in the minority here, but I find the idea of a TPK to be very interesting, even from a player perspective, especially if it's a good epic moment for it to be a TPK. I think that has some really cool potential for what you do next, or even for that to be the ending of the story. I think it's okay for the heroes to lose if your party is down for that, your players are down for that. So no, I would not say as general advice, but maybe in very specific circumstances, that would be a fun way to fix a TPK if everyone is unsatisfied with it. But then you got to work out how it comes to be. I just happen to have time travel very available in my campaign through a Sphinx. Emily asks, Are you using the mini world's interpretation of time travel? If yes, then why do you want Cadric and Ilya's kids to grow up without parents? I don't want Cadric and Ilya's kids to grow up without parents. That wasn't my goal. Am I using the mini world's interpretations of time travel? I don't know. There would be no way for anyone in the 999 timeline to know whether or not the other timeline continues to exist, because while we have the theoretical capacity of time travel, we have introduced no capacity for jumping between alternate worlds, at least not in this campaign. By the way, if you're interested in that kind of thing, do check out the second campaign of Eberron Renewed, because there was an organization introduced that is kind of TVA-like in that it jumps between alternate timelines. So Eric is clearly down for that interpretation of time travel. It raises the question of, does the Khyber Shards world exist on the branching timeline of the Eberron Renewed world? So that's not making the kids grow up without parents was not my goal. But does the timeline still exist after the strike force goes back? Because whatever happens next, the strike force will have changed time. And so does this timeline still exist after the strike force goes back? I don't know. And probably won't have any way of finding out in this campaign. What do you think? What happened to Cadric and Bajak's families? Cadric's family got out and are with Arlo. Bajak's family died in Stormreach. That was kind of the motivation for the way Eric designed Bajak as a character, having him go the way of the long death. He's become very fatalistic, very interested in death as a concept, but has accepted that he's probably not getting out of this alive. Was there anything the Strike Force or Dragonblades could have done to avoid Cul'sir finding them? I hadn't really decided that was going to happen ahead of time, so I guess so. It made sense to me because when the diversion was introduced to allow them to get the time machine, it just seemed like there was no way you could have a large scale diversion like that where there were no prisoners, and no way that Cul'sir's dominion doesn't possess interrogators capable of guaranteeing that they get the information out of somebody's mind. And so once the diversion was there, I kind of felt like this was likely to happen. And then when the Dragon Blades killing the Warden, Arandis wouldn't necessarily tell Cul'sir what's up unless she had really good reason to want something stopped. And so there seemed to be multiple avenues by which Cul'sir could find out what was happening. And I intended that he was always looking for them. So could things have happened in a way that didn't seem the logical thing to happen to me? Sure, absolutely. But I don't have a chain of events that they would have needed to do differently. It made sense to me that this is where things would come to a head given the sort of way that the play had gone through up to that point. So that's my answer for that. I didn't decide this was happening ahead of time before any of the play, but this is what made sense to me after I saw the way the play had gone. What happened to Nea? For that matter, what happened to Zilargo in general? That's a fascinating question again, and I don't know. The gnomes are so fascinating in Eberron, and Zilargo particularly. So I don't know. I didn't really spend time on Zilargo in the Age of Cul'sir, so I would again be very interested to hear what anyone else thinks the Trust would do in the face of this catastrophic event. That's a really cool thread to pull at, but it's not one that I had pulled at. Why did Thistle and the Dragonblades refer to River as the Queen of Thorns instead of Keeper of the Grove or by her name? Because she had gone back to her Queen of Thorns persona in response to the danger. Remember that the Silver Tree on the floating island is a point of contact between her domain and Eberron. It's essentially a manifest zone, and it's in Cul'sir's main city. So I think the odds of Cul'sir not having threatened her domain at some point are very low. I imagine that the Silver Tree would be a way of getting people out, getting people in, and on some occasion, Cul'sir would figure that out. And so River, in the timeline that we have, has returned to being the Queen of Thorns, and is in a very dark persona. Given that Ezri's biological family was in Sharn, did Arandis resurrect them, or did she only focus on her side of the family? Having her powers back and having access to Ezri, I'm not sure she would necessarily make it a priority. There are a lot of kind of hints in various places in Eberron lore that she's been working a lot of bioengineering and mage breeding and whatnot programs to try and find survivors or little threads of her bloodline. And so I would imagine that with her powers fully restored, she would be able to bring a lot of those in. So I don't think Ezri's family would necessarily be essential to her plots. Obviously, if she could get a hold of them, that could be useful to her. So it could be worth doing. It would just depend on whether or not it fit with her plans now that she's resurrected, for like what's stage 2 of her grand project. Arandis claimed the elves for this purpose to drow count. I think Arandis would say yes, and I think she would push that when it became convenient for her. I think probably Arandis has not made a bunch of effort to evacuate the drow from Zendrik, but having them as a potential insurgency present in Zendrik could be very useful to her. And I would be very unsurprised to find Arandis supporting the drow in Zendrik in some way, through the Umbragen or through certain tribes among the Volcori Dal. Perhaps attempting to resurrect the old Cabalrian necromancy that was the original specialty of the House of Vol. This would be another avenue for Arandis to find out more of what's going on, because remember, the Strike Force kind of laid out their plan, which got passed to the Umbragen. And so if Arandis has connections within the drow of Zendrik, then it'd be very easy for her to find out more about what the Strike Force is doing. So there's a lot of potential leaks in the operational security of what the Strike Force and the Dragon Blades are up to. If Dane died, and that's an if, considering how vague the last scene with Dane was compared to Merrick's last scene, who would be the new leader of the Resistance? I'm not going to argue with you about that. If you felt that was vague, that's fine. That's the fun of this kind of story. And it's fair. In a comic book type world that we've created, if you don't see a corpse, that's a reasonable way to interpret it within comic book reason. So I won't debate authorial intent there. But who would be the new leader of the Resistance? Bajak, with Kadric going back in time. If Kadric could make it back, Kadric would be the obvious leader. But assuming, at least in the moment, Kadric and Ilya are not there, Bajak would be the most logical one. Donabella wouldn't want it, I don't think, and is probably just not stable enough emotionally to handle that kind of position. Bajak, even if Bajak's reasons for being that way have gotten kind of dark, Bajak's kind of stoical attitude toward all of it would probably make him a very stable presence. And then Emily's last one. Why did you choose Helix and Diani as leaders of the Galifar Alliance instead of current, in 998 at least, non-figurehead rulers like Arla? So my reasons for this. One, just personal reasons. I find the character of Diani Irwin and her position in Thrain fascinating and interestingly complex. I've always wished there was more written about Borenel's children. Hallex being at the Reckonmark Military Academy when all this starts is very interesting, and so it makes a lot of sense that he would end up not back in Brelin, but somewhere closer, Thrain or Onder. Why not Arla, and why not Borenel, and why not Caius? Well, Caius would be in a difficult position with Erandus resurrected. And so what's become of Caius is, I think, a very interesting open question. I think the possibility of Caius being dead is high if he went down fighting against the undead hordes that woke up in Karrnath. There are also reasons kind of written into some of the Eberron lore that Caius might be a willing or unwilling collaborator with Erandus. Borenel, there's no way Borenel doesn't die fighting. That's just the way the character is thought of and written about in all of the fiction. There's no way Borenel didn't die fighting. Keeper of the Flame wouldn't be universally acceptable. Why not Arla then? That's a fair question, and there's certainly an argument to be made there. But I think at least in most of the fiction, and there's not a lot, but in most of the sources, Arla's not really presented as a unifier. She is struggling to even maintain the unity of her country. I think it would be hard for her to compromise. She's not really presented as a compromising figure. So I think that would be difficult for her to negotiate her way into this. So those would be my reasons for maybe not Arla. But mostly, I think that Diani and Hallex are interesting characters, and I knew I wasn't going to play a lot in here. So it made a certain amount of sense. I kind of imagine Hallex as young and a little bit dashing, but also a little reckless and inexperienced. Diani as a much more subtle politician because she's had to be to hold on to her position, though limited though it is. And so the pairing of those two personalities sounded very interesting to me. Those being the personalities I imagine in those characters, and so that's why I picked them. Arla would be an interesting choice, assuming that she's still alive at that stage in the story. But my reasons were that I tend to see Arla as too uncompromising to make the deals that would have to be made. And Mia has a few. Did Cardane explode the lab? Was that the explosion that happened at the end of the Cul'sir Dane fight scene? Yes. Dane was buying time while Cardane basically turned the lab into a bomb. When Merrick's winked out of existence, and oh my god, that line, thanks. Was that him dying in an explosion or blinking himself into another plane? I can say that the way I wrote it was kind of the beep 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 was intended to be kind of something has been triggered, some kind of self-destruct has been triggered. But given his incredible technological savvy, him having some sort of contingency of plane shifting when he reaches 0 hit points or something like that, would be very in character for Merrick's. And so that's a very interesting interpretation, and I think one that would be fun to explore as well. My thought process was some sort of self-destruct, but those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So that's an interesting an interesting way to think about it. Had we already met the drow that Merrick's faced? Briefly, I didn't get to throw this character at them enough times to make her a cool, or to make them a cool recurring villain like Demise became. But yeah, Tahak was present in the temple that they went to where they first found Cardane. They were the drow fire monk in the beginning that was really having a good time fighting them. That fight went so one-sided that I didn't really get a chance to roleplay them for very long. But that was yes, that's where that character came from. Were you excited or nervous about rolling out this incredible fight? Did you have it planned from the very beginning of the campaign? It was absolutely not planned from the very beginning of the campaign. It wasn't even planned from the very beginning of the Age of Cul'sir arc. I was both. I had planned out a lot of the scenes because a lot of them were going to be me and not combat. And so I wrote more things down. I rehearsed more things than I'll ever do. So I was very excited to put it out because I was pretty happy with the way that it was looking in my outline. But I was extremely nervous because it was going to be a lot of me talking to me. And I and most GMs try to avoid that as much as possible. And lastly, would you mind if most of the views on that episode were me watching it over and over and over again? Not at all. I will take any views we can get, and you can watch it as many times as you want. I have decided not to overly concern myself with whether the algorithm loves us or not. I am thrilled with the fans that we have and their excitement about our stories that we tell. So you rewatch it as many times as you want, and I will just be perfectly happy for you to enjoy it. So that is all of our questions. Thank you all so much for these questions. This was so fun. I hope it is not too unsatisfying for me to leave things undeclared about the Age of Cul'sir. I like leaving that kind of fiction open so that myself or anyone else can explore that world more themselves if they want to. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find all of our socials in the description down below. New episodes of Khyber Shards drop on Mondays, and probably not next week, but generally new episodes of Khyber Shards drop Fridays. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.